Hey everybody, welcome to our live discussion of our buddy read of Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie. I'm joined here today with Jonathan from Words in Time. Um, and to start, I'm going to summarize the book, Ancillary Justice. This is the first book in the Imperial Rights series, which is a
Yeah, that's a
trilogy.
tough one. You walked yourself into a trap there, trying to pronounce the name of the trilogy. I've been saying Raj, as in kind of like badge, but
Oh,
with an R. But gee,
yeah.
I'm Australian, so feel free to correct me.
Do you know for sure the pronunciation?
Absolutely not.
Okay. I sometimes I'll like go and watch videos of the author reading the book to know the pronunciations. This one I didn't, and there's a lot of made up language in this book. So viewers beware. I'm going to be doing my best, and I'm sure Jonathan is as well.
We'll try.
Uh,
We'll get it mostly right, I'm sure.
yeah, yeah. So Ancillary Justice is about Breck, who was once a spacefaring battleship with a multitude of human bodies, or ancillaries, to serve her crew through. After the destruction of her ship body, instantly killing all of her crew and her ancillaries, Breck is reduced to a single human body and has vowed to seek vengeance against the person responsible. However, the target of her revenge so happens to be the most powerful person in the universe. So, absolutely high stakes in this book.
They didn't make it. Old Anne Leckie didn't make it easy for poor Breck, did they?
Absolutely not. Um, so I don't know. Do you often rate your books after you read them?
Oh, we're jumping right to the rating where people want
Yeah,
to
that's
know up
usually where I
front.
like to start so
I,
people like will know as we go on why it's that rating. But I know
we'll
not
give
every
the
book
rating
super
and
likes
then
to rate.
justify it over the
Yeah.
course of the discussion. Okay. Will I use an out of 10 system with half marks? So
Nice.
yeah, you got a range around 20 marks that you can give it. And I gave Ancillary Justice a 7.5 out of 10. I quite liked it. I thought it was pretty good. It verged on great. Didn't quite get there, but I'm still glad that I read it.
Nice. I probably should use the 10-star rating system, but because I use Goodreads, I usually do it by the 5-star system.
We'll do the math. We'll pay the interns to convert it for you.
Right, because I ended up giving this one 4-star, but like 4-star can mean so many different things for
Mm-hmm.
me. Sometimes there's a high 4-star, which I think this would count as a high 4-star for me because I had very slight issues with this, but otherwise I really enjoyed this book and I'm so glad I read it. So yeah, for me it's more of like a probably a 4.5 star to kind of translate it to half
Yeah,
star system.
the interns are telling me that's around an 8.5, maybe even a 9 out of 10.
We gotta start paying the interns for their hard work.
Yeah. Awesome. So we both quite liked it. What in particular, if there was something, what's the first thing that comes to mind when someone says ancillary justice?
Ooh, for me, all I knew about this book was that the main character was originally a starship. And honestly, that is such a cool concept to me. I'm someone who always loves AI characters. It's like an instant interest in a sci-fi if there's gonna be AI in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Anne Leckie kind of took it in her own direction with not only the Justice of Turin having multiple human bodies, but that they're humans, not just machines. I think by adding that organic component to the story, mixed with the AI, it just brought it to like this whole new level. I think that I haven't seen explored before in science fictions. I've seen androids with organic parts, but this is um, even more than that. These are actual human beings who are almost husks now. That they're not exactly dead, but they're no longer human anymore. They're completely overridden by this AI that controls them. So super messed up concept, but like I absolutely live for that stuff.
Yeah, I'm very partial to AI characters myself, but I'm not sure if I've read a book from the perspective of an AI. I know
Really?
Murderbot Diaries is a popular one. That's on my list. But usually they're either funny companions or evil opposition. Uh, so to get into the mind of Breck, I think it was just a really interesting exercise, a literary exercise that Anne Leckie pursued. And there's a mystery there, trying to kind of wrap your mind around an AI mind and character. As a human myself, just in case people were wondering, not an AI,
Yeah.
I am a human. So trying to relate to an AI character was a little bit tricky. But also just the technology behind it was a bit of a mystery, because Anne Leckie doesn't really give you much information. She just kind of plops you into this world and you kind of piece things together as you go along. So yeah, I want to know more. How do they get the AI into those humans? Where did those bodies come from? Are they just farmed? Were they existing humans that had existing personalities that just got overridden with the AI personality? Did
That
did
last
you get an
part is
answer to
what I
that?
assumed. But she doesn't really answer it for us. But I
Yeah,
think it's highly implied that that last part, which you said, that these are humans who have been overridden to become these like machines, these tools. That's what I got from it, and I don't know if it's. I kind of assume just because of the kind of world that Lecky sets up, it's very imperialistic. I feel like the people who end up becoming ancillaries, I think that they're probably like people who wouldn't submit, like coming into already established worlds, and okay, there's people here, they don't want to be ruled by us, so we're gonna take them and literally make them slaves by turning them into these tools, these machines. That's kind of what I assumed about it, and just from the general vibe I got from the world she established.
that
Not
would
much
make sense.
evidence to support it, though.
Yeah, I think that would make sense though, because annexation is a big theme of the book. The Empire going to these other planets, these other cultures, and taking over them. So to take it to the next step, just take over their people, take over their minds and brains, and rather than just spreading their culture, they're actually spreading a personality, an AI personality, into the husks, the human husks. Is, I guess, a logical extrapolation of that. So it's evil. It's funny how the Empire doesn't necessarily come across as evil in terms of the descriptions, but then when you take a step back and think about the stuff they're doing, you're like, hang on, not a
Right.
fan of that.
And but I feel like that's appropriate just given who the main character is and what her
Hmm.
role is in the story. She's not really built to question it. We're kind of supposed to see it from that point of view. Michael from Fit to Be Read says the characters make reference to it early that they overwrite conquered peoples. Okay, so there is actual in book evidence of it. I just forgot.
Yeah, that makes sense. I thought it might be, but I didn't know if they were. Yeah, yeah. This book does have some Cixin Liu esque elements, because it's it's interesting how it focuses on quite personal things. So we have characters talking about fairly mundane things like fishing zone regulations and drinking tea. But then there's also very kind of like high concept sci-fi tech stuff going on at the same time. So I did enjoy the blend of the two.
That always marks like a really good space opera for me, when it does kind of get into like the nitty gritty, very mundane culture things like like the fishing license, it really sets up that world that they're on, that there's people who are so poor that they have to depend on illegally fishing to feed themselves, which also I think helps develop the concept of these people just being conquered by this empire that doesn't really care about them. They just want more land and more power. I thought it was super well done.
Yeah, that definitely seemed one of the core explorations, hierarchy and power, because you
Mm-hmm.
have these certain social dynamics where you're supposed to follow the rules, or that's a social faux pas. And then we have the way that the military works is kind of inherently hierarchical. Uh, and then the difference in the power structures between the different planets or cultures. It's like, oh, here's what you have to do to get into the empire. Here are the rules that you have to follow. And yeah, it was interesting to kind of see how for some people that was just very matter of fact. That was just
Mm-hmm.
their way of life. And then for other people, that other characters, that was imposed upon them.
Yeah. And it makes sense too. It feels very organically like this is a massive universe with many different people coming from many different walks of life, which was really incredibly well done. That is not easy to replicate, but she did a good job with it. I think one of the my favorite details about this book is language. And I feel like Anne Leckie has to be a linguist to have captured it so well. The book is kind of like implied to be told in a language that isn't ours. And that is mostly relayed through the fact that Breck will only use she, her pronouns for any character, because whatever language she's telling the story through, they don't have gender included in their language. So it's very like monogendered on, just like anything feminine becomes the default for her. And times where it breaks away from that is in dialogue when other characters will use gendered language, or even in the beginning of the book, she kind of sets this up really soon, where Breck is talking to I wish I remember what the people's names were, um, but it's a conversation which she has to speak a language that does have gender, and she kind of makes these mistakes, that the social faux that she doesn't understand because the language she speaks doesn't have gender, as well as I think there is like the implication that like certain pronouns uh relays more detail than just gender. It relays like social status and like, if this person married or not. And I love that made up language. Like it just felt so real to me and so thorough.
It was funny seeing Breck, who is kind of on this quest for revenge, where the stakes are massive. There are massive implications for the whole empire, but they're also really stressing over getting the pronouns correct. So they're trying to avoid. They're like, oh, what's something general neutral? Just avoid pronouns in this sentence altogether. And then when they have to refer to one, they're just like, let's roll the dice. Yeah.
Right.
Let's flip a coin here and hope I don't get shot because of it. Um, I thought it was interesting how it kind of challenged maybe some of your perceptions or what you are predisposed to do. Because I think if characters are not gendered, I think I often picture them as male just because I'm male and I'm placing myself in that situation. And
Hmm.
then in this book, because all the pronouns for the most part are she, her, I assumed that they were female, even though they may not have been. They could have been. There's just a good chance they could have been male. So just one tiny word, one little shift in the language, totally changed your assumptions. Uh, which I think is just really clever, because the book doesn't kind of hit you over the head with any kind of message. It doesn't say it is done for X, Y, and Z, and therefore
Hmm.
A plus B equals C. It just makes the change, and it's up to you to adjust and like respond and try and figure out, the differences in your own sort of culture and language and understanding because of that difference.
Yeah, I think this book definitely is a challenge for at least English speakers, just because uh, I'm trying to think of like what languages have very gendered language where every single word, I think Spanish is one of them, that like every single word, every object has a gender and it's very trivially assigned. And I feel like that's kind of what she was trying to achieve through doing writing the book the way she did, was genuinely creating a new language that reflects how languages in our world sometimes act. But it's interesting what you said though about how you will automatically assume roles to certain characters even before a pronoun is used, and I feel like the same way. And sometimes, for me, it's often occupation related, which is like kind of sexist. But if there's a nurse character, okay, I'm probably gonna think she's a female until otherwise said, or an officer, okay, that's gonna be a guy probably. um so yeah, it does, she kind of does challenge things there too in that way. um
So what did you think of Breck? Because I
I
don't I could be wrong, but I don't think they ever told you definitively whether
oh
Breck was in a they're an ancillary, so you could debate there's no, you know, AI's personalities don't have genders, but within the ancillary human husk, are they? Did you think that Breck was in a male or female body?
So I actually read Breck as a female, and I think a lot of it was originally the pronouns. It took me a while to figure out that just because everyone's using she/her pronouns doesn't mean that character is going to be a woman. Um, and then I think at one point I started to question it with I think the mention that one asked the specific body that Breck is in about like their voice or something, that like it's a very unattractive voice. So I'm like, okay, is it like a deep like masculine voice that like Breck just doesn't like? Um, but I think near the end it kind of hints, I think at one point, that uh one Ask is in a female body. I would think it's like a throwaway line, but it was just kind of like, oh, I think that's the point where it is suggested that at least that body is female. But with the way that ancillaries work, Justice of Torin probably has literally all different types of bodies and probably is both male and female in that regard, which is kind of really interesting to think about. The book doesn't emphasize it, but I'm assuming every single ancillary has a different face. That they're not this like
Yeah, I don't think they're clones, so I
same
would imagine they
person.
all look different. Yeah.
No, but that's kind of the implication if it's just all different people, and what does that look like? But since we're looking through Breck's eyes, you don't really get that experience, or I don't think Breck would even. Breck can recognize like the other bodies and will call them by their assigned names or whatever. But I don't think like Breck sees that as not them at the same time. It's such a like mind blowing concept that like I can't even capture it.
Yeah, this was probably my favorite aspect of the book. The concept that one identity was simultaneously combined with many, many multiple entities. And I kept on trying to relate to it, as in, I have two hands and I can be doing one thing that I'm really focusing on, and then maybe I could, scratch my head without really thinking about it. I can multitask, but I can really only focusing on one thing. I really have eyes that can look in the one direction. So imagine if I had another hand and another set of eyes that's not just doing background stuff. It can actually have the full attention of that set of eyes and that hand. Like, what would it feel like for my brain to be processing two entirely separate things at the same time? Now make that 1,000. You got 1,000
Right.
people. There, some could be on the ship in space. Some could
Mm-hmm.
be down on the battlefield. Some people could be having a political conversation, and you are like processing all of those things at the same time, and then it gets separated.
Hmm.
Now one of a combined thousand is one on its own. Like how does that affect your self of identity? How do you view yourself as a person? What does it mean to be you when you're without like 999 of the former pieces that you're connected to? This I could have read 1,000 pages about that. That I thought that was the coolest part of the novel for me.
Right. And I think when the first time that split happens, like as a reader, I could feel that like disorientation and that fear that Breck went through, to be okay, suddenly I don't know where all my bodies are and I don't know what they're doing. And how scary of a thought is that? It's like if your hand just like, started doing something like completely without your command. Um, so I feel like that concept was relayed so well that like as a reader I understood, hey, that's a really scary disorienting thing for Breck to experience. But I like that setup of like the many bodies and the many places that the Justice of Turin can be at the same time through these ancillaries, just because like my favorite stories that deal with AI are ones that really lean into that other sort of creature vibe. I don't like when AIs are trying to be human. I like it when the author really leans into like this is a alien life form pretty much, like obviously we made them and they're gonna reflect us somehow, but ultimately they're an entirely different being with like different wants. And I think just that like really hard to relate to personally concept of just being in all these places at once, relays that AI alien experience.
Yeah, but even though Breck appears human and some characters in the story even think that she is human, they don't realize
Hmm.
that she's an ancillary. She does feel alien, and that concept does kind of relate to other aliens that we've read in other books that have a hive mind mentality. The fact that she's connected to all these other ancillaries is kind of a form of a hive mind, and
Yeah.
it makes sense that they would be used as soldiers because strategically, you know, rather than me having to tell Bob who has to tell Sally, to get our military strategy going, you have 1,000 people that are all on the same wavelength at the same time. That would make it much easier to annex these poor outer planets.
And also with like the soldier concept, you definitely get the sense when Breck is this multiple ancillary being that she doesn't have fear of dying because, if this specific ancillary dies, I have all these other bodies that are going to carry on with this like overall higher um like conscious being, like she still lives on even if one of the bodies dies. And like how powerful is that if you're like have this army of soldiers that aren't afraid to die because technically they don't die and technically like the orders are never lost. It's just okay, redistributed to another person. It's such a brilliant tool of war, to be honest.
Yeah, there wasn't a ton of action in this book, and I would have actually liked to see that play out. Not that
Hmm.
this is military sci-fi. That's obviously not Anlecky's focus, but I think if there had been a bit more engagements and we got to see how those battles would play out from the perspective of an ancillary that has so many different entities, I think that could be really cool. I'd like to see how those fights would play out.
I agree, but also I feel like with the information that Lecky gives us, like I can already picture what that looks like, That it almost goes without saying because she developed it so well.
Yeah, they'd have to come up. She'd have to come up with a tough opponent because I think I think most human armies would not fare very well.
Absolutely not. And it very much establishes like how hard it is for a human to fight against an ancillary between like these like reflexive armor that just comes up around the ancillary when they're threatened. I think she definitely has shown, even just like Breck, one-on-one with someone else, that other person has no chance against them. She's just so augmented from being just a normal human being that like she's definitely a killing machine. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, there was that sequence towards the end where it was a bit like trying to take down a Terminator. It's like
Yeah, right?
did not bode well for them. That you mentioning, oh sorry, you mentioning the armor just kind of made me think about the scene where Breck jumps off the bridge or the
Mhm.
ledge to save Saivarden. Is that the correct
That
character
was
name?
my guess too. So yeah, we'll go with Save Arden.
And I thought that was one of the more kind of thrilling scenes. In retrospect, it does make Saivarden look a bit silly for not realizing they're an ancillary. They're like, they're just a
Right.
really good human that just risked their life to save me. It's like, no, it's because they have like superhuman capabilities. But yeah, I did like that tech aspect of it, the armor, the shield, and the relationship between Breck and Saivarden is kind of one of the main sort of emotional threads of the book. Did that work for you? Were you invested in those two as characters?
By the end, I really liked their relationship, but it definitely took a while to
Yeah.
build up for me. I think actually one of the things that I struggled with at the start of this book was just like, and I don't think it ever really went away, was just like not understanding Breck's motivation for saving Savardin and for just like constantly going out of her way to take care of this person who has such a death wish and like at every turn is like accidentally almost dying. When like constantly in the narrative, Breck is just like, I don't like Savardin. Like I think like they're pretentious and are an asshole and all that. And so it was kind of like I had a hard time understanding, well, like what is her motivation for you know spending all this effort trying to take care of Savardin. And I don't think the book ever really answered why she felt so compelled to, because I almost like took it to be like there's something in her programming that makes her like have to take care of this person, that she would actually jump off the bridge to save him. Um
Yeah, I don't think I ever really connected with Breck's motivations or really understood their character arc. But they're an artificially intelligent character, right? I'm trying to place human thoughts, emotions, journeys. I'm kind of projecting that onto an AI character, which doesn't really make any sense on my part. So it probably is something to do with programming or a glitch, like something's gone wrong in terms of the electrical wiring or however however the ancillaries work, because I mean, unless you're one of those people that thinks that an artificial intelligence can develop to such a point that its existence is comparable to that of humans. And I'm certainly open to that position because I do end up always falling in love with AI characters.
yeah.
Uh, it I didn't really see the explanation for Breck's attachment to Survivin.
Yeah, and I think it's like especially with like the emotion aspect, we do see in this book that Breck really has a close connection with Lieutenant On. So we know that she's capable of liking people, liking specific human beings. And so for me it kind of makes that make less sense if she is capable of liking Save Arden enough as a person to want to go out of her way to save him, but she's saying in the narrative that she doesn't like him.
We know they do have the freedom to make emotional connections because a
Mhm,
bunch of the ancillaries went crazy when they got separated from their captains.
mhm,
So we know that it's not just like it's not very simple linear programming. We know that they do have feelings of sorts. It's just kind of
yeah.
like exactly understanding the parameters of those feelings, and like he didn't really give us all the answers.
Yeah, and I'm kind of curious to see if this is something she's planning on answering in another book in the series. I'm assuming the next book follows the same characters, so I still feel like she built up that there is going to be this reveal of why Breck cared so much about Sayvarden. Maybe I'm just looking into things too
Yeah,
much, but I'm like I really wanted that, and she didn't give it to us in the first book, so
because she
maybe the
spends the
second.
whole first book saying, and she was not even one. What she? Although, so Varden, I'm fairly sure is actually male, but
Yeah, I think so.
Breck always refers to her as she. Anyway, she wasn't even one of my favorites. Never
Right.
even liked her that much. Like, she's, when someone kind of over protests, it's kind of like, there's got to be something there. Why do you keep on telling us that you didn't even like her that much when you clearly have
Right.
gone out of your way to help them?
Yeah, like literally she'll be saying that while she's save Arden's life for
Yeah.
like the fifth time in a row.
It's like, you know why I hate you? It's like, I don't know, but you keep saving my life, so thanks.
Yeah. But I do like how they end up at the end of the book where Save Arden is very loyal to Breck, and I think Breck kind of reluctantly has accepted that she's always gonna be stuck with Save Arden. Um but
I
they
like I liked how it was proved kind of beyond question at the end that Breck was an ancillary, and so
yes.
Varden was still like, no, no, they're definitely a human. Like, no, I've spent a lot of time. I will vouch that they. It's like, no, like they're telling you, like,
Right.
all the cards are on the table. Like, bit slow on the pickup was Varden, but
Denial is one hell of a drug. So,
did
oh.
endear themselves to me by the end, though. I agree, because halfway through, I'm
Yeah.
like, this person doesn't really. They just want to take their kef drug, feel no emotion. They're kind of a screw up. They don't like Breck. Breck doesn't like them. Like, if this person were to get lost or get killed, I'm not rooting for that to happen, but
Hmm.
it wouldn't ruin my day. But, by the end, I was like, yay.
Yeah, definitely there was points in the book where I was just like, just leave him. Just leave him.
Mm-hmm.
It's fine. You're good without him. But by the end, I was like, oh, this is really cute. I did really enjoy their friendship, I guess I would call it, or companionship.
Mm-hmm.
So it does grow throughout the book. I do like the concept though of ships having favorites among the crew. That was such a cute detail to me. Again, because I love AI so much, and because I can just picture that happening. Especially, how Breck says like, okay, for like a favorite, the doors always open up immediately for them. Like these favorites are never waiting on anything. The ship serves like hand and foot for their favorites, whereas like people that the ship dislikes, causes a little more inconveniences for, which
Yeah,
is
we'll
such a
send one
human
of the ancillaries
characteristic.
over between 2 and 7. Somewhere in that 5-hour window, we'll get one over to you.
Right, yeah. And like anytime like technology inconveniences me now, I'll just be like, okay, like you're conscious, aren't you? You're doing this on purpose.
Yeah, why aren't I one of your favorites?
Yeah. So I love that detail. I know Mike mentioned, and this was a little while ago, I basically pictured everyone as a woman. The language bulldozed me into it. Same. In hindsight, I have my ideas of who is which gender, but I like that I read it as a female cast with few exceptions. Yeah, that's um the few exceptions part definitely resonates with me, that it seems like I would instead default to female for most characters unless otherwise suggested. So yeah, the book just felt mostly female populated. I know we mentioned already Sayvarden is very highly implied to be male. And I think, and I'm gonna butcher the name, and my document reloaded, so I lost my space.
Was
Oh,
it Strigan?
I wasn't thinking Strigan. I actually didn't have an opinion on Strigan's gender. Did you? Did you think Strigan was male?
No, not for any. I think at some point I just started randomly assigning just to like mix it up, you know?
Yeah, and like it doesn't really matter for most of the minor characters who we're never gonna see again. It was the character Anna Ander Mia Naai.
The Imperial.
Yes,
I'm forgetting the term. Like the Lord, the ruler,
the big
the Emperor.
person. Yes, the emperor. I think at certain points it was referenced that Anander was a man actually. So
I definitely pictured them as female, but they were another person that had many entities, so it could have been a mix.
mm, yeah, and I was kind of confused about that. I wasn't sure if like they were the same as Breck, that like they had like these commandeered bodies pretty much that they were using, or was it more like a like cloning situation where like I almost pictured Anander to have literally clones of all just like the same body. Um but nowhere in the book does it specify that they all have the same face. So that was like really highly an assumption on my part. But
Yeah, because so when you're a soldier, you're just kind of part of a unit. You may or may
yeah.
not, there may or may not be benefits to looking the same. But when you are the emperor and you
Hmm.
walk into a room and everyone's like kneel or bow or whatever you do in the emperor, you need to know that that's the emperor. So it would
Right.
perhaps make sense that the emperor physically, their face, they do look all the same because if you're some peasant walking down the streets of the Raj Empire and you fail to kneel to the emperor as they walk past, you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was emperor's face number 752. I can't remember them all, so maybe they were all the same.
Yeah, that's kind of, I think, where that idea came from because it doesn't make sense if, okay, I just woke up a new body and now I have a completely new face that no one is going to recognize and people should recognize because I'm like the ruler. And as well as I just kind of assumed that Anandar would have the resources at hand to be able to just clone themselves for to have as many bodies as they can possibly have. And I feel like cloning is slightly suggested to exist in this world with like the like regrown organs and body parts that happens in like the medical aspects of the book. So I kind of assumed that the technology is there, that if someone really wanted to, they can
Yeah, I
have
don't remember
bodies.
any specific references to it, but if you said, Jonathan, when you got to the end of the book, did you think the Raj Empire would have the technology, the ability to clone people? Yes, they're
Yeah.
pretty advanced. They could definitely clone. And Ananda was one of my favorite characters. I thought that was another really interesting concept, being at war with yourself.
Yes.
So not only do you have these multiple entities, which is a strategic advantage, you can garner an enormous amount of power having the one mind connected to so many people. What happens if that goes wrong when part A and part B start battling each other? It's kind of like what would happen if you were to fight your clone. Like
Yeah.
that's kind of cool, but now they're not just clones where like your history, your mind, your skills, your experience, your personality is the same. Your actual mind is the same. So it's like they're not physically fighting. They're not trying to like, okay, I know he's throwing a right hand. Now he's going to try and grab me behind the neck. They weren't fighting, but they were playing chess against each other when they
Hmm.
both know that the other moves that the other person's going to make. So it had to be very like secretive, almost fight a war in their own subconscious. It was super trippy. I loved it.
Right, it's such a brilliant concept too, because like how often in life are you faced with like two major choices and you just can't decide. And so that's where I think what happened with Anandar is, they reach this point in their career of like this invasion of all of the universe, and they're like, well, do I continue trying to build up the rake, or do I, try to dismantle it? And I think like at that moment, that's when, the split happened. And okay, one mind thinks this and is going to do this, and one mind thinks that. And, it all falls apart from there. And also just really cool to have the like villain of the story be like the exact type of creature that Breck is, that Breck also once had multiple bodies, and she can understand that. And there's obviously the hive mind that connects them all, but Breck has her own personality quirks that make her herself, and that's definitely something the book explores a lot. With she is the one who really likes music, and she is the one body that is always singing, as well
Yeah.
as she personally really likes Lieutenant On, whereas the ship itself, she wasn't the ship's favorites per se. And I think that's and Lucky really establishes that to kind of further um like just like establish that, so when the reveal comes that Anander is the same person, but these two
Mhm.
different versions of this person at a war with themselves, it makes sense because we've seen that these ancillaries do have their own slight differentiations.
Did you think there was a good Ananda and a bad Ananda?
No.
Because when I was reading it, the Ananda that wanted to stop the annexation on its surface seems to be the better option. That
Hmm.
seems to be the kinder good natured Ananda at work. But Breck was like, I don't trust you, and I don't trust you. Like,
Breck is
and
pretty
it's like,
much like, I don't care which one of you was the one who blew me up and
yes.
like killed my favorite person, but like all of you are gonna die
Yeah.
for it.
Because yeah, that was interesting because it was like we got to know Ananda a little bit, but we didn't. I don't think the motivations between the two were fully explained or realized, and they had a theory as to the split because it
Mhm.
implied that there were aliens, right? And that the
Yes.
aliens had bugged her, and this was a result of essentially her being bugged. I think Breck thought that that was not the case, that
Mm.
Ananda was just kind of looking for explanations where there may not have been one. But anyway, well, we'll talk a bit more about the aliens in a minute. But
Yeah, I'm like, we gotta go back to that point.
yeah, it was interesting to me, like trying to weigh up those motivations, whether I was rooting for or against, or just like, nah, yeah, all of you have bad intentions. No matter how you pitch it, I know there's
Mhm.
something sketchy behind it. All of you have to pay.
So my thoughts on that was, yes, I do somewhat agree that the Anander who's like, I'm gonna destroy like all this colonization. I do agree with that choice, but I feel like this is still the same person who decided to colonize the whole universe in the first place, so the history isn't very good.
Yeah.
um so I kind of can recognize that Anander is a bad person no matter what, but this is the better choice. And I can kind of feel like, okay, like if it would benefit Breck, maybe Breck should, go along with this Anander versus the other one. Uh, but also, if they both have the same face, like how trippy is that? If it's like you can just be lying the whole time, and how would you know which Anander they are? And I think that's also part of the reason I thought they were all clones, because Breck couldn't figure out who was the one who had ordered her to kill Lieutenant On versus the other
Yeah, Brett
Anander.
kept on saying the one on the left, the one in the middle, the one on the right. They wouldn't. She never said the tall one, the blonde one, the dark skinned one.
Right.
It was so. I think yeah, I was like you. I was picturing them all as appearing the same.
Yeah.
So
So
aliens.
aliens, yes. That one kind of came out of left field for me, because up until the point aliens were mentioned, I really had in mind that this was a universe that was entirely colonized by humans. And it just it didn't seem to me that there was any alien life forms, or at least sentient alien life forms, comparable to our sentience. Uh, so I don't know if I missed something earlier on in the book that there are aliens. Um,
I remember it referencing aliens, I believe, somewhere in the middle or first half of the book.
mhm,
And it was something like that there was not like a truce, but kind of like an understanding of like fighting each other is not beneficial to either of us. So they were kind of like, okay, we're gonna stay here as long as you stay over there.
mm,
I could be wrong, but I kind of remembered something to do with that. But then the fact that Ananda thought that the aliens had bugged her and that's why her personality had split implied that there could be a conflict that we were leading towards with the aliens, which is kind of a good tease for a book too, but it's also like, hey, that's super awesome. Put it in the story. I want
right.
less tea, more aliens.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I remember that part that you mentioned with the truce with the aliens, but when I read that, I think it was early on in the book, and like the fact that aliens weren't present before that moment, I wasn't sure if they meant aliens in the fact that like this is a different group of humans that
Mm.
live in a different part of the universe, which kind of fits the like the setup the story had up until that point. It is very much about like these different groups of humans and their conflicts. And we do call like people who are different from us from different places aliens sometimes. It's not a very nice term to use, but it definitely gets across that fear of other people, um,
Because Breck,
xenophobia sort of thing. So,
yeah, Breck spends some time. There's a bit of like a time jump that I thought was handled a little bit awkwardly, but
mhm, I agree.
because the book is following our present timeline and then 20 years ago, and
Mhm,
then as the past timeline kind of catches up a bit, there's like a jump. And in that jump, we know that Breck spends a lot of time in some other planets, some other cultures, and there was some reference to those people being so different you could almost question whether they were still human. Something
mhm.
along those lines. So it is possible that the aliens are not flying green lizard people. It's just it's just humans that behave very differently. But I interpret it
Right.
as aliens.
I think when we know, like, towards the end of the book, that makes a lot more sense to interpret them as actual aliens, but I feel like she didn't establish that well enough in, like, the earlier part of the book for me to understand that. And that kind of is where this book lost a star for me, is the lack of comprehension, or the half star. I think we decided it was 4.5 stars. Um, it was really hard to understand when I started this book, and I didn't really get into it until the first 100 pages, which for me, that's a very long time to get into a book, especially because I read so much short science fiction. Some science fictions I read are only 100 pages,
It's done.
So it's like, how do you put off the setup that long? And in the beginning, it does have that time jump that every other chapter is one's in the past and one's in the future. And the book doesn't really do a good job of relaying that. And I was kind of confused to start, especially because in the like past chapters, Breck goes by mostly either, the Justice of Torn, which is the ship identity, or one Esk, which is what their body is called. So I wasn't sure if that was an entirely different character than Breck. I just found it super disorienting because she doesn't really, she could have like labeled the chapter as like 20 years ago, and like maybe would have cued me in a little bit better about that. But it definitely was a bit of a curve to get into this book and to really understand like the format of the story and who these characters are.
Yeah, my enjoyment of this book kind of took an interesting trajectory because I love the first chapter. I was so on board after the first chapter. It's like we got this mystery, we got this badass character that kind of people want to mess with them. She's like, "You don't want to do that. Nah, I'll kill you. Easy." Like, I'm hardcore. I'm bad to the bone. And you're like, "Okay, this is kind of cool." It's kind of got this detective noir sort of feel, but on a snowy, icy planet with an AI character. This is awesome. I love it. And then the next kind of 80 to 100 pages, it's pretty slow. It's kind of confusing. If you're not paying attention, you'll kind of lose track of which chapter you're in. You're like, oh, wait, is this a present chapter or a past chapter? Okay, yeah, past chapter. Got because of this. Yeah, like it was not super cohesive and it was not super engaging, but there
Hmm.
was just enough interesting concepts to hold my attention until it started to pay off in the back half.
Hmm.
But I was like you, there was a good chunk where I was never out on the book. I was never not enjoying it, but I was a bit kind of like, is this going to go somewhere worthwhile? It's a little bit confusing.
It makes you work for it, I feel like, and like you said, it wasn't very engaging in the beginning, or at least like, maybe after the first chapter it kind of falls off for me. And for me, every time the time jump happened, then there's these different characters and they all have made up sci-fi names, and so I just had a really hard time of remembering, oh, who's who. And so every time it would change, I would like kind of scramble for the first few like pages trying to remember, okay, like this is 20 years ago, and this character is this and has this relationship with this person and whatnot. um so for me it was just like very difficult with not much like payoff at the beginning.
Mhm.
So I did kind of struggle with that, but I do think it like becomes so well worth it once you get past those first 100 pages and like finally like everything comes together. And you're no longer struggling and things are just exciting and really engaging.
Yeah, once you start to know a bit more about what happened, why Breck is looking for Ananda, potentially how that might come to be, you're like, okay, I'm invested in the story. But earlier, when it's just a lot of people standing around complaining, I'm like, go back to the bar fights, like make something happen.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of like those complaining parts, it's like I don't know who these people are. Like I don't know about these cultures. Like why do I have to learn about this now when I'm not like invested in these people yet? So I
Petty,
the
petty,
setup could have been a little bit tighter for me,
a lot of
in my
petty
opinion.
soldiers.
Yeah, petty soldiers. But if this is literally Anne Leckie's first book, I don't know if it was her debut or not. It is amazing.
You, you fill the space for like
Oh
20
gosh.
seconds because I feel
I'll go to
I'm
comments
putting you
quickly.
on the
There's
spot.
some people showed up. Self-centered. That is a super fun booktube channel name. I haven't read this, so I can't stick around long. I'm sorry, we did go into spoiler zone. But I love what you're doing. But
Thank you,
Jonathan
Shelf
did
Centered.
a spoiler-free review, I think, of this book already on his channel, which his channel is Words in Time. It's linked in the description below. So if you're interested in the book but aren't ready for the spoilers because you haven't read it yet, check out his video.
I said to fill the space and you plugged my channel. How kind of you. You're better at marketing my channel than I am. Okay, so this is what I was trying to find. Just because I remembered there was and this is not a spoiler, there's a meet the author page in
Yes,
the book.
I think
And
I have the exact same copy as you.
she has an interesting background. It says Anne Leckie has worked as a waitress, a receptionist, a rodman on a land surveying crew, a lunch lady, and a recording engineer. So yeah, I mean, she might have like an English degree or something as well. She might be a linguist, but it was a very interesting background. I think she's kind of has a lot of interesting world experiences that she's brought to this book, which might not be what you'd expect from your typical sci-fi author.
Absolutely. And I got the impression, as I said earlier on, that I think she's a linguist or she's at least bilingual or has spent time in like a non-English speaking country, just because she really captured that like stranger around like people where you kind of know the local language, but like you don't know all like the like nitty gritty details of language that you don't really get from
That's like me
just
when I
studying
visit the
it.
South. People are like, what do you mean you don't know what grits are? And you're like, I don't know. I'm Australian. I never ate grits before.
You're not missing much. But yeah, so I assume that just at least came from life experience. Um, but yeah, what a fascinating story to come from all that.
Yeah, I think it's amazing that this is her first novel, and it this has been kind of talked about a lot. It won everything. Yeah, think of a sci-fi award, it probably won it. And it's fairly well liked, I would say, by the community.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't I don't put too much stock in Goodreads ratings, but it can kind of give you a rough idea of like the temperature of the community. And I think it's got like a 3.98, which is solid, but perhaps not quite what you would expect for something that was like so loved by the critics and the award givers. Uh, did you have any thoughts on that in terms of like maybe why it won, or do you think it lived up to all of the awards?
Um, I I'm trying to see what year this came out in
I think
to
it
try
was
to get a better idea.
2013, if I had to guess.
You're right on the nose. October 2013 it came out.
Sometimes
Um,
you get lucky.
yeah, my thoughts on that is I think just for like the time it came out, I think it's just experimental in the right way for that time period. Especially with like the gender and the use of pronouns. I feel like that's something that wasn't really done at that time. I mean, to be fair, I did think the use of the pronouns, it really reminded me of like The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin, which obviously came out in the late 60s, I think. Which, this coming out like a whole like 60 years later, not quite 60 years. Um, it's
Yeah, I
interesting that there was like that like many decades of no one really playing around with pronouns and like gender expression in the same way as Le Guin until more recently. I think we kind of lost our boldness in stories to be this like experimentative. So I think that's probably what works in this book's favor, is that it's kind of just really daring in a way that no one else was doing it at the time. And I want to guess that this came out before Murderbot too, uh, because like it does remind me of Murderbot in ways. Um, yeah.
yeah, I haven't read it, but it sounds like there's a little bit of a crossover there. I yeah, I can kind of see both sides. I see why this was popular with the awards because I think it's a very ambitious book. I think there's
Hmm.
some really cool concepts. I think it felt fairly original. There probably is some influences there, such as Ursula K. Le Guin, maybe a little bit of the Culture series from Ian M. Banks. You could maybe draw some parallels, but it had a rather distinct tone, and as you said, it kind of makes you work for it. So I think it is a kind of a rewarding book for people that really love sci-fi. And then I think for the casual reader, I'm not saying the casual reader's not smart enough to get it because I mean I gave it a 7.5. I liked it, but I didn't love it either. I'm kind of with the casuals. Um, so I can kind of see like a little bit of a disconnect. I wouldn't say it was
Hmm.
overrated or didn't deserve those awards, but having read it, I kind of see that little bit of a gap between the two.
Yeah, I actually was thinking that too while reading this. If I'm like struggling with this book as much as I did, and I'm a heavy sci-fi reader, like what is someone who doesn't read sci-fi? This is the first sci-fi book they pick up. How are they gonna manage with this? I feel like it is kind of unfriendly to, um, and that's highly assuming on my part. I don't know if there's probably some people who don't really read sci-fi but read this and loved it, but I kind of got the impression that this is probably a really hard book for someone who doesn't like sci-fi to read.
Yeah, it's brave because, as you said, and like he was a first time writer. So if this
Right?
was written by, I'm trying to think of an example, very different styles, a bad example, but let's say Andy Weir. Okay.
Yeah.
The Martian, Project Hail Mary, big hits. If I was reading this, I'd be like, I don't know, Andy. Normally I know where your books are going. I don't know where this is going, but I trust you.
Hmm.
But we don't have that faith in Anne Leckie because I mean, if you were reading it in 2013, you'd be like, you're a first time writer. I don't know whether to trust you. I'm 100 pages in and I have doubts. So yeah, I think it was brave. And I think, even though I didn't love it, I think it did pay off in the back half. So I
Absolutely.
respect what she went for.
Yeah, I don't know if I would have stuck with this book if it wasn't so universally loved. Like if I was in 2013 and read this book, I've never heard anything about it. I
You
probably
got
would
an
have put
early
it down.
manuscript. She hasn't even been signed
Yeah.
to a
Yeah.
publisher yet. You're like, check
And
out
like
this.
she's never gonna sell a book. This
Yeah.
is trash. I'm not that mean. Um but yeah, I feel like because I read it now and because so many like other people like who I appreciate their opinion, they really like this book. That's part of the reason why I'm like, oh, like I probably would like this too. Um that's what kept me reading long enough to finally see, oh, this is starting to pay off. But yeah, I don't know if I would have finished it if I didn't have that knowledge that like, hey, no, this is there's something about this that people really like, and I gotta find out what that is.
That success is kind of a double-edged sword because it helps you get your name out there, more people read your book. If they are struggling, it does give you that credibility to push through. It gives you a bit more respectability or whatever, and people might end up enjoying it more because of it. But you do have the community that go the other way. It's kind of like, it's overrated. Why did it win so much? It's not that
Yeah.
good. And so, I mean, that's a good problem to have. I'd rather sell a ton of books and have some people think I'm overrated than never get a book published. But so I don't think Anne Leckie's too stressed about it. But it is kind of funny how the community can kind of react based on its rating or awards.
Oh yeah, and I feel like just how I feel about the books that are really popular now. There's some that I'm like, this is overrated. I read this and this wasn't a big deal. It's hard for me to try to know if I would feel the same way if I had read this in 2013 and everyone's like glowing about it and just be like, oh, it's okay. Like, why is it winning all these awards? It's just all right.
Yeah, I try not to worry if people like stuff like, it's like, I don't think it's overrated. It just wasn't for me. But I'm glad
Yeah.
you like it. Uh, and
Oh
I
yeah.
quite like this one.
Yes, this one was quite good. I think I've expended through all of my thoughts. Do you have any other last points about the book you wanted to talk about?
I don't think so. I think we covered. I think we covered some good points on ancillary justice. There's a lot to unpack. I guess the last thing I was going to ask, because I'm kind of undecided on this, are you
Mm.
going to continue the series?
Ooh, I am tentatively yes. I am very bad at sticking with series, and I tend to dislike any books after the first book. Like I always end up rating books that follow the first book way more critically than the first book. Um
Interesting.
yeah, I don't know why. There's like first books that I absolutely love and I'm like I'm so excited to read the next book and I read the next book and I'm like this was nothing. This is an insult to the first book. I don't know why. I just really struggle to stick with series. And also there's all these like first books I want to read and all these like new standalones I want to read. So it's just like yes, I would probably read on given the opportunity, but it's very low on my priority list right now that I don't know when I will get to it. But I didn't hate it so much that I'm like, oh, I can't stand to read another one of these, which I have thought about some series, so I'll give it that.
I think I'm similar to you because I liked the book to give. I liked the book enough to give book two a shot,
Hmm.
but if if someone had read the sequels and came to me and said, Jonathan, you're gonna love book two. There's way more hard sci-fi technology.
Hmm.
There's aliens. It focuses on all the trippy concepts to do with identity and memory and all of the stuff that you loved about it. I'd be like, yes.
Hmm.
Where click? Where's the buy button? I want to read that now. But a lot of the reviews that I read were like Pride and Prejudice in space or Downton
Ooh,
Abbey in space, even more tea drinking than the first book. And I was like, that's not what I wanted to hear. That was not the focus that I was hoping for. That was not my favorite aspect of book one.
that's
So
definitely not where I assumed this series would go either. That's so weird.
the comments that I got under my review were kind of mixed. Nobody that I can recall hated them. It was kind of like, they're all right. They're probably worth your time to. It seemed like book three was kind of popular. They were like, I was kind of mixed on it, and then it paid off in book three. So I think I'm like you. It's on the TBR, but it's a little ways down. I don't think it's going to be. I'm not going to be prioritizing it in the next month or two.
Right. Yeah. All right. Anything coming up on your channel that you would like to advertise in this space before we sign off?
Sure. I don't have anything in particular, but as always, there's going to be more sci-fi content. Got book reviews, lists, rankings. I will have the next round of my decade battle coming up soon. That's kind of a fun series where I take my top 5 books from each decade and then I make them battle against each other. So my top 5 1950s sci-fi books versus my top 5 1960s
Ooh.
sci-fi books, and then the winner goes on to the next round, and at the end I will declare my favorite decade of sci-fi.
Ooh, that's really cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and
Yeah,
this
thank you for
was
inviting me. This was fun.
great to read this book because I might have given up on it if I wasn't buddy reading it. And yeah, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for everyone who contributed in the comments. Really appreciated, especially from Michael Fit to be Read, gave us some insights from the book as well.
He's
Um,
he's sharp, that Michael. He catch the details that we missed.
yeah, I think Michael literally just uploaded a video about this book too, so everyone's been reading it.
We caught the
So
wave.
yeah, it's contagious. So thanks everyone and have a good night.